The following episode of the Voices of Resilience podcast contains sensitive topics, including conversations surrounding residential schools, intergenerational trauma, addiction, systemic racism, and mental health. These themes may be distressing to some viewers. We encourage those affected by these topics to seek support and care while viewing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Any community I step into, I know that I'm a visitor. It's hard to step into space where people don't know you. I am from Side Eldel, where people of the river. I want to see my nieces and nephews and their babies growing up differently. There isn't just one way of healing. And at the end of the day, when you're leaving, are you proud of what you've done?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Voices of Resilience podcast. We are out in the central Alberta region today with the beautiful Red Deer River flowing behind us. We're sitting down today with someone who is very passionate about mental health and addiction towards our Indigenous communities in central Alberta. She actually won back in 2021 the 40 Under 40 award through Avenue magazine, which highlights 40 Calgarians under the age of 40 that are business-oriented and community-oriented leaders within their communities. She's now taking her experience and her tenacity up to the Rocky Mountain House area within the Indigenous communities around there. And I, for one, am super excited to see what she ends up doing with that community. And on top of everything, she is just a very bubbly human being with plenty of stories and by far the best boss I've ever worked for. This is Melissa Turatus. So yeah, let's just, I'd love to just jump into it. I'd love to dive into your own personal journey and what experiences along your path that led you to the type of community work that you're doing now.
I actually fell into it, to be totally honest with you. When I went to post-secondary school, I actually had a dream of going into criminal psychology.
Okay.
And then through that process, really fell in love with human services and working with a diverse group of people in different stages of life. And the cultural piece really came at the very beginning of my career. I had the privilege of working with Indigenous youth from my home community, actually from all over Canada. So it's a residential treatment program for youth and families. So it was there where I really, really fell in love with culture, that journey of self-discovery, and just being open to new experiences within my community, my family, as well as how important it is to incorporate that in just your life, because we're so detached from it. Right? So I really fell into that and fell in love with it. And 2013, moved from British Columbia to Alberta, where I actually took a small break from Indigenous community work. And I actually entered into a very Western corporate for-profit work, which I think prepared me for everything else later in life, kind of bridging those gaps and building up into really, truly discovering what I loved. And I greatly missed working with Indigenous people. I missed community the most, I think, was the biggest thing. I worked with a lot of seniors, and through that time in very rural areas throughout Edmonton, and really advocate for seniors' health and mental health, because I think we often forget about our seniors. But when the opportunity came to work with Indigenous people again, that's where I'm at. That's where my home is, right?
Instantly you knew. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially after spending so much time away from it and more profit-driven businesses and stuff like that. I feel like we all have to go through that kind of phase to
Yeah. Well, walking in two worlds, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
really understanding when is it okay to be Indigenous in those environments.
Mhm.
And also, I think for me, because I had been away from home for so long and I didn't have any connection to my community being way out in Edmonton, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
you were already disconnected. You pulled yourself back into it, and then you put yourself in
yeah,
another situation that was disconnecting from it, right? So
yeah.
yeah,
So it
that
was
makes a
kind
lot of
of
sense.
like a little journey of where can I belong? And I think
Yeah.
that's in mental health and addiction, that's the foundation, right? Where do I belong?
Hmm.
Who can I spend time and share knowledge and wisdom with or learn? So yeah, that's really how I wound up working in Alberta and working with other Indigenous communities. I always felt like back home there were two or three like Indigenous um, organizations you could work for. And of course, you have people that have been there for years that there's just not a lot of movement, right?
Hmm.
And progress too. I just find Alberta to be very progressive in a lot of ways. And I don't think people who are here who have like fought the fight for so long, I
Yeah,
don't think that they really see that how far Alberta has come as a province in terms of Indigenous relations and just support and care.
that's beautiful. That's that's a very unique perspective to have from the Indigenous communities in BC to Alberta, and I
Mm.
think you hit it on the nail there. I think it's very easy for people to be lost in their own universes,
Oh,
especially when they've
yes.
been doing it for so long, and it's really hard to see the how far you've come from
Mm.
where you started, right? So yeah,
100%. Yeah. Yeah, it was university that really opened my eyes to certain things that we weren't taught in school
yeah,
around like residential school
oh,
and intergenerational trauma. So that's when I
absolutely.
actually realized that my mom didn't go to a boarding school. She was always very um, diplomatic in her experience and not
Mhm.
really sharing too much about it, but just saying we went to a boarding school. And I, as a kid, I would look at how my grandparents lived because they're very traditional folks in terms of living off the land, no power, no running water, no electricity. So, and I thought, oh, wow, grandma and grandpa could afford to send you to boarding school. That's really cool. And here I am at this public school.
Yeah.
But again, that was just her way of, I guess, talking about it, but not talking about it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So, and
Kind of
then,
hiding the pain and
yeah,
from being disconnected, and yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it was through that, university, that self discovery, when I was working with youth, that I realized, like, oh man, I've been so confused for most of my life about who I am, about my identity as an Indigenous woman, and even having a hard time up until my early 30s, accepting and acknowledging being Indigenous.
Hmm.
And I think I'm not the only person in that boat.
Absolutely.
And I knew very early on in my career, wow, if I feel this way, and I'm looking at these youth and I'm thinking, they are where I was for majority of my adolescence, right? So, and I think through that, I just really had a passion and saw the importance of why we need to have Indigenous service providers
Hmm.
in our communities providing that care, whether they're from the community, whether they're transplants like me.
Hmm.
That experience is necessary because we all relate somehow, right?
Yeah,
We all have that yearning to understand who we are, where we come from, and where we're going, really.
yeah. So yeah, you touched on the fact that your mother uh went through the residential schools, what you thought at the time was a boarding school. Um, Integrating the generational trauma that would have come from that. Do you what I'd like to touch on your perspective of how important it is
Mm,
to understand that intergenerational trauma and how it affects our mental health, our kids'
mm,
mental health, and moving forward. Like how do we heal from that sort of thing?
mm.
Is it important to heal from it?
It's important to acknowledge and I think be present in having that conversation if you are a survivor or it can be very heavy content, right?
Mhm.
I actually didn't hear my mother's full story until she shared it with me in June of 2020 when, what was it, 21? When the 215 in Kamloops was coming about. And I had gone up there to do some mental health support for the community just because it was close. And I knew, you know, my mom would show up and we spent time in the arbor. And it was a very powerful moment just because up until that point, I hadn't seen my mom really partake in any cultural experiences. Whereas for me, I mean, I started sweat and drum making and all these beautiful things that I didn't really talk about with really too many people, just because I felt like it was my very own space to really explore and tease out what that meant to me and how it fit into who I was.
Mhm.
So that experience that June when we're both walking in the arbor and her vulnerability and her strength really was present and you could just feel it in the air. Like I can't explain it. We did 4 rounds in the arbor just for a couple of family members who had passed on and didn't have the opportunity to see this all of this come about.
Mhm.
And just really honoring those memories and to be there with her. I don't think she realizes how important that was to me in my healing and how it really, really lit the fire in my heart to push further, to really step into that Indigenous space and take it up.
Mhm.
Because I'd been told for so long, because my father's German, that, you know, the lateral violence that comes along with being half, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I also
Walking
had
between two
this
worlds again,
little
right?
this
Yeah.
little thing on my shoulder saying, well, you're not Indigenous enough to do these things. And how really connected are you
Blood
to actually,
quantum.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, do you have enough blood quantum in you to actually be an advocate, to actually do this work? And I think that's a part of the reason why I never really shared with too many folks about, what I was going through in that very cultural space, spiritual space, and mental.
Mhm.
And then that night, when we had returned to my friend's house, my one of my siblings came, and we were all sitting, and my mom, for the first time, told us her story. And as a clinician, I'm listening, but also as a daughter, because I'm thinking back to so many things in our family's history.
Mhm.
Um, oh my gosh, things started clicking. Family dynamics. Oh, you know, attachment, all these things were just kind of like washing over me. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity because I never thought it would come. My mom is a very strong woman. And because of that strength, I'm a fiercely independent individual. Um, but to sit there in silence and just have her share and seeing, like, it's something that she hadn't shared with anyone other than probably my father, who also, was German but grew up in the foster care system. So I grew up in a home where I had two parents who wanted so many different experiences for their children, right? So there's a lot of pressure to be Canadian, what that meant.
Yeah.
Paying your taxes, having a good job. My mom, I remember her always saying, you're either going to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Oh, Asian household too. Oh, Asian
Yeah.
household too. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
sorry, mom, I went into like human service work
Yeah.
instead. But, there came a time where we had a very intense moment later on, I think later on that year, where she told me she was very proud of me and what I was doing. And, this is stuff I've never shared with her. So thanks for allowing me the vulnerability to really get that out there
Of course.
um, because it meant a lot. Okay, that's when I knew, creator, I'm doing the right thing, right?
Yeah, well, and I just want to extend my thanks to you as well for being as open as you are right now and able to to share these revelations. And I know, like, even just talking about it doesn't matter who you're talking about it to, if you're on a podcast or if you're talking to it to a friend or a stranger. Like, there's always going to be those different clicks every single time you open up about these things that are going to connect to other things that you might have not realized before, right? So I'm just happy that we're able to hold that space for you
Yeah.
today as well. So
Yeah. And I think when you're looking at mental health and addiction, as service workers, we have to do this work
yeah.
in ourselves in order to be there for our community. And really, from that point, I was like, okay, I just want to see a healthy community. I want to see my nieces and nephews and their babies growing up differently, being that they can be kids.
Yeah.
Right? As Indigenous young people, we know that we grow up fast.
Yeah.
And I always see like the younger generations after me having that opportunity just to be kids. And I think, oh my gosh, that is brilliant. I love seeing that and to see it more, right?
Yeah. Owning that identity at such a young age. When on my own account too, it took me up until I was in my mid-20s for me to fully start identifying myself as a Native person. And leading up to that, like going through high school to middle school was the worst. Like, I was getting bullied for being a Asian kid. There was no ounce in my body that wanted me to start identifying myself as a Native person, because I was terrified on how much worse that bullying was going to get if they saw that side of me as well. And I remember even talking to my parents, like, my Indigenous blood comes from my dad, and like, I love him to death, and he's grown so much since then, and he's starting to take up that identity himself now, which is so beautiful to see. But back then, it was really pushed on us to not identify ourselves as Native people, because they wanted a better life for us, right?
When you're looking at the residential school movement, if you will, it really, they weren't raising young people with healthy attachments, right? And so when we look at the generations that came before us and the missed opportunity, like, I had time with my grandparents on my mom's side that she didn't have. And today, like, my grandmother is still very much inspired and living well. And there's the beginning steps towards that relationship to build, right?
Yeah.
And in June of 2020, I'm really blessed and privileged to know that my relationship with my mother got stronger, because I now knew from the clinician side, I understood so much more. And I had more compassion and love for the experience of getting to do that work in tandem with, like, trying to help other people, but also realizing in that moment, oh shoot, I have to help myself too.
I'm healing too. Oh crap.
Yeah, exactly.
It's such a cool superpower, but it's all, it's a double-edged sword. Like, going through this type of work and coming from these backgrounds, you start to mirror a lot of what you've experienced with the people that you're helping, and it can be really triggering a lot of the time, right? Like, a lot of the men that I help through my program, I see my dad in their eyes tenfold, and it forces me to take a step back. But then I'm able to show up for my family too on a more clinical side of it, and just to hold that safe space for them, rather than just getting frustrated
and angry
that things aren't different, that things aren't better, and understanding that type of anger is only gonna keep it's just gonna keep this pattern perpetuating of being disconnected from family, of being disconnected from community, which is what was intended with the residential schools in the first place, right? So it all just ties back to that intergenerational trauma. If you don't choose another way to understand it, then you're passing that on to your future kids.
Absolutely. Right? And also, like, we have to be mindful too that, finding that ceremonial space is really important, and finding those safe individuals who provide that, who have the grace and have the patience to teach folks who don't know. So I was very lucky in the beginning of my career to work with an Indigenous agency that had elders that we did sweat. We did all these amazing things. And, that really, I can't explain how much, or even just how important that was, like
Hmm.
foundationally for me as an individual and as a clinician. So being able to separate that, I think it was the hardest part, because I also was not too much older than the girls that I was working with.
Hmm.
So, there's that aspect of it too, where, any community I step into, I know that I'm a visitor, and I'm very humble about that, because it's hard to step into space where people don't know you.
Yeah.
But it's also, I find, a little easier as well, because there isn't a preconception of who you are, where you come from, or who your family is, or any of that kind of stuff, right? So
Hmm. All of that gets thrown out of the window, and then
yeah,
the only preconceived notion is that you are the outsider, right? So
yeah,
if you can, it's a lot easier to
you
maintain.
can
Yeah.
work your way into that, right?
Yeah.
By
Yeah.
just showing up.
Yeah. That's what I did.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna put my foot in here
Yeah.
and then kind of push this door open a little farther, right? And I've
Yeah.
been really lucky throughout my career to work with different elders in Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and how open and loving they've been. And
Mm,
I'm very, very grateful for that experience, because I know it's not the norm for everybody, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And even in having people outside of the community coming in to these different roles, it can be triggering in itself too, depending on the person, depending on what they have went through, what they're trying to heal from when it came to that era of residential schools, which is again not that long ago. It can be a very scary thing allowing someone else that
Mhm.
you don't know in, right?
Absolutely.
So,
So if you look at certain Indigenous communities that have built their own detox centers, that have built their own residential treatment,
mm,
um, that's really powerful stuff right there. Because what you're seeing is a community saying, we have the tools, we have the experience to bring our people back in.
mhm,
And when you're looking at that powerful space, and even in urban centers where you're seeing more Indigenous led organizations bringing people back in, and providing that care and support in that traditional way, or even just contemporary. Because when you look at Western mental health and addiction methodologies, like it would be almost considered contemporary, right?
mhm,
When you're when you look through certain, like, you're seeing more and more Indigenous based, land based wellness um, organizations popping up.
yeah,
And if there wasn't a need, why would we have them, right?
mhm,
So when you're looking at reconnecting to your roots, when you're looking at who am I, what is my history, where am I going, um, you need to have that space to do so. And also, hopefully, Indigenous people leading that movement, that fight, right?
mhm,
Um, for me, the moment it clicked, I guess, I don't know, I've always been out on the land in some way, I guess. Even, like I said, my grandparents, they had this little cabin on a plot of land that we've had in our family for generations. And going out there every summer and spending time with my grandma and my grandpa, just around the hay fields, playing with my cousins and things like that. I always felt a very like a very peaceful and insightful just way of being,
mhm.
because you didn't have all the TV gobbing up your time, or um, technology back then, because I'm old. Back then, there was no like iPads or anything. So, but you also had chores, you had
Yeah,
responsibility, right?
yeah, there's
And
so much to teach you, and,
yeah. And then when I
um,
went into clinical work and dealing with the coping with the vicarious trauma of
yeah,
listening to these stories, and you know, there's a couple that I carry till this day, just because I feel like nobody should ever experience life in that hard way. Or even seeing a client go from missing to murdered.
mhm,
It's very, very hard. Like, how do you deal with that? So I spent a lot of time outside, just
mm,
because that's where I felt I could process a lot more, and I could feel that emotion and change throughout the body, because it's not just your mental, you have to think about your physical too. We talk about our feelings, but do we talk about how it feels in our bodies as
mhm.
we're feeling them, as we're experiencing that,
Your
right?
body's the biggest indicator
Oh,
of
yes.
what your body needs,
Yes.
right? Brain included, like,
So anytime I'm experiencing hardship, or I'm processing something whether it be personal or professional.
Hmm.
Like, let's not forget, like, you still need that space to process your professional experience as well. I find river where I can, because I am from Side Eldel. We're people of the river.
Mm.
Um, and I really just listen to the trees and the wind and find that grounding peace, because that's when I can do my best thinking. Even when I'm writing grants, I need to have a window open or something. I need to hear something of nature. So, um, when you're looking at providing that care for that space, we have to be sure that when we're helping people through finding space to belong, because really, when you're looking at mental health and addiction, it's displacement,
Hmm.
dissociation. There's a whole bunch of things happening, reactive attachment disorders, things like that. Um, it's important for people to recognize that there isn't just one way of healing. There's so many other ways of healing, right? There's abstinence-based healing for addiction, where it's your AA, NA groups, those types of really foundational work that works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everybody. So you look at harm reduction models, you look at, smart recovery, all these different programs, or even Wellbriety, which is Indigenous based, right?
Hmm.
Variety is the spice of life. I'm convinced that no matter who you're working with as a professional, it's not about you. You know what your healing journey is, you know how you cope and you manage, but this individual may not. So you
Absolutely.
need to provide them as many spices to really encourage that healing, because what's good for one person isn't going to be good for the next 100 people.
Yeah, I think that's a very toxic mentality that was brought up to us from public school systems. Just the basis template of what a human is. There's no template.
No,
Every
but
single human you come across is so unbelievably varied.
Mhm.
There needs to be a spice of life. I love the way that you put it. That's gonna stick with me
Yes.
100%. What works for one person is not going to work for the next.
And it's important as the clinician to really separate yourself from that, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I find that we can, in professional spaces, like, root maybe too hard. We may want somebody to be like 20 steps ahead of where they're at, but we have to
Mhm.
remember that there are times where you need to take a step back,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And inc- like, just having the space to do that in an environment where ceremony, land-based wellness, all of those pieces of those teachings from elders or knowledge keepers, we have to remember not everybody has the privilege or the access to those things,
Hmm.
especially when you're looking at your urban community, like myself, who left my home and found my roots here in Alberta,
Hmm.
really. So being invited to sweat, I'm like, oh yes, thank you. I can now build relationships in this way that I find um, calming, or even just being there means a lot.
Hmm.
Even the invite means a lot. Um, so when you want somebody to belong somewhere or want to open that door for folks, it's important that it be genuine,
Hmm.
authentic, and also safe.
And without expectation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because everyone heals at a different rate.
Yeah. A regression is just as common as,
Mm,
well, what the goal is to progress through
yeah.
that healing, right? But there's going to be plenty of steps taken backwards, but it can't be met with a sense of punishment or a sense of
No,
disappointment. There has to be grace.
and it has to be okay. What did
Yeah.
we learn? Okay, great. What
Yeah.
are we going to do next?
Yeah.
And it's not up to me, it's up to the person. I can give you six different things that, oh, these are really great. But I also want you to go off and do your own homework,
Hmm. Yeah.
because I don't know your family. I don't know those small bits in your life that maybe have really formed who you are.
Hmm.
And those experiences, some may be terrifying. For some folks, ceremony can be really stressful.
Yeah. Well, I think uh, gauging how much someone is living in their survival state
Hmm.
opposed to outside of it will really help you understand where their own biochemistry is coming from with their own emotions. Like the same chemical compound that's created in your body when you're excited about something is the exact same thing when you're nervous or terrified about something. It's all just how your brain perceives it, and that all comes from your own different experiences,
Yeah.
right? So
And it's identifying.
yeah. Yeah.
identifying those emotions, how it feels.
Hmm.
And
Learning to flow along with
yeah,
those different changes is so important. And I think drawing it back to land-based teachings, it learning more about how the elements flow
mm,
in and out of each other and
mhm.
how they can be damaging and can also be healing will help you understand that all of that is in yourself too.
Space and time,
Yeah.
right? Space and time. And we often need more time than space,
Hmm.
if that makes sense, um, to really process something, right? And grief is a tough one. Grief can linger for a long time, really until you're ready to let it go.
And it can stay dormant. You
Yeah,
can feel like you're healed from it and something will come up, it'll trigger a
yeah,
lot. It'll
100%.
fester up again and that's okay.
Yeah, and that's why your smudge is important.
Yeah.
That's why, if there's an opportunity to spend time listening to language, even if it's not your own,
Hmm.
like that is really powerful stuff. And it's really humbling and reminds you of, oh, now maybe I can take a step back and reevaluate and see where I want to take this,
Hmm.
right? And non-indigenous or indigenous, whatever your background is, I think it's really important for you to know your story,
Yeah.
because there's so much strength in our stories from the very beginning, and we don't celebrate that enough.
Yeah.
When I look at the entirety of my family, especially like my mother's side, I see a lot of strong women. And I'm always so proud when I see their kids doing cultural, traditional things like hunting, spending time with their grandma, and learning those ways that when I was little, I didn't realize, how important that was, and
Hmm.
to hold on to those memories. And even just sitting by a campfire and listening to my grandfather tell a story. I mean, he would captivate you for hours
Mm.
with all these stories. And, looking back, I'm like, I wish we recorded these stories. So many lessons learned through stories and
Hmm.
experiences. And I think, again, a privilege that I was blessed with. A lot of Indigenous folks don't have the access, or maybe they've passed on, or they're disconnected from family. So I just always encourage communities, when you're inviting Indigenous people in of
Hmm.
diversity, remember that this may be the only opportunity possibly that they've had to connect, and to be really kind and gentle in that space,
Hmm.
because it's hard to show up. It's hard to show up
Yeah.
in the beginning, and then you can't get rid of us.
Yeah. And honestly, when you're going through that first journey of reconnecting, it really is just about showing up.
Yes.
Even if you're terrified, you've never done this before, like
Yes.
you don't know anyone in
Mm.
you know the one person that invited you to the sweat. You have
Yeah.
no idea what a sweat is.
Like,
Just
you're
show
not
up.
going anywhere.
Yeah, show up and put yourself in a situation that you can help provide for whatever is going on
Mm.
during that day, and
Yeah.
things will start getting better, and so you'll start connecting to your people, and
Mm.
it'll all just happen step after step, right?
So much courage
Yeah.
needed, like to start a journey, any journey, no matter if it's healing or going for a drive. There's so much courage in making that decision. And I don't think as humans we take that time to appreciate that courage.
I think choosing to heal and
Yeah.
from anything that
Hmm.
isn't just a physical, injury.
My boo boo.
Yeah, just a boo-boo is probably the scariest thing that you
Hmm.
can do in your lifetime.
Because it's also, how am I going to change?
Yeah.
Like, how is this going to change me? How is it going to change my family? How is it going to change my community?
Hmm.
Because oftentimes too, when we're looking at people leaving treatment, um, they've had a very individual, very personal experience on that journey.
Yeah.
Whether they go to an Indigenous based healing center, or they go to a Western based healing center, they've experienced a change. And the courage to maintain that change when you return to community, when you return to an environment that hasn't changed, and how to be strong in that, can be could be really intimidating and daunting and
Hmm.
lonely,
Yeah.
right? So I always advocate for aftercare is really important. That accessing healing spaces in your own community is really important. But also, it can, again, there's that that other side to it, that catch-22 of it's in your community, and we know sometimes there can be some friction,
Mhm.
and how to work past that, right? How to be strong through that, because it can be disempowering.
When you were talking about your grandfather, it tuned
Mm,
into me. Something that just kind of clicked in with me is that
mm.
our people have always been natural storytellers.
Ah, yes.
Like when you go through these land-based teachings, it's not this is why we do this because of
Yeah,
this and this
yeah,
and
yeah.
this. It's all
No,
up to interpretation of the person through their own journey of
yeah.
how they want to interpret it, right?
Mm,
And that was ripped away from us.
mm,
Um, Storytelling was ripped away with the taking of our culture, with the
mm,
taking of our children during the 60s scoop. And
mhm.
that wasn't too far along. Like your mother, just a generation
Yeah.
before you, was
It's
a
wild.
residential school survivor, which is
That's
crazy. Yeah.
wild. Like, when I sit back and I think about that, and people ask me, like, being an Indigenous person doing non-for-profit work,
Hmm.
often you do come across organizations that are non-Indigenous who ask, like, interesting questions, or even just other professionals from rural, like, I don't know, I can't even explain that, but I've had folks be like, "Why are you people so angry?" I'm like, let's unpack that. You're
Interesting.
Now we're gonna have an hour-long conversation where I'm gonna ask you more questions about.
Firstly, because you said you people.
Well, it falls really back into, like, okay, so you're home one day, you're sitting at home and you're having cereal, and somebody shows up and tells your mom that you have to go.
Yeah, for no
Are you
reason.
gonna be okay with that?
Hmm. And then you're not going to see your parents or your grandparents
Mhm.
or
You're gonna
sometimes your
see your
sister or
siblings, but you won't be able to talk to them. Like,
yeah.
and I think slowly kind of pulling it all back and really walking that person through the experience. And afterwards, it's like, oh, yes, your experience in your community is not the same as what our folks, our families, our community has experienced,
Hmm.
right? So angry, I wouldn't say no. Um, Passionate, yes.
Hmm.
And we should be reclaiming space
Yeah.
and time and doing our storytelling. Some of the best memories I have as a kid is sitting with my cousins and listening to stories, like whether it be grandpa or my aunties, or, there's always that time when I go home and it's a holiday or whatever, and everyone's in the kitchen, and all you hear is like the laughter and the love, and you can feel it from the driveway.
Hmm.
I'm always so grateful that, there was a lot that took place and maybe was taken away, but there's so much there that we don't appreciate enough. Like the fact that we can sit and listen to the aunties, and when they start speaking traditional language, you're like, you're talking about me or you're talking about someone I know,
Yeah.
you know, um, and just savoring that moment, realizing that, this is something that wouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think maybe I reflect way too much, but I'm always so grateful when I go home and I hear the laughter of the aunties, and us younger generation of women slowly coming into the kitchen and taking our space, right? and
Yeah.
and being grateful that we get to have that experience,
Yeah.
right? And that in itself is a cultural experience,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's
Like,
beautiful. It's slowly starting to come back. The
mm,
storytelling of our people is starting to flourish again, and it's so beautiful to see. And seeing being able to be in those rooms and uh, to watch our younger generation and the spark that
mm,
flares up in their eyes while listening to these different stories, it brings me straight back to when I was a kid, and it reminds me of why I'm here in the first place, is
mm,
to create that space that I might have not had or that I needed for the next generations to move
mm.
forward without all of these struggles of who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing,
But
right?
also making sure that folks know you're on a journey and it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to have that self discovery. It's okay to ask questions.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of times families don't talk about a lot of things because you're not asking the right questions. You're not asking questions at all.
Yeah. The reason that was brought towards me with my parents not opening up about their lives until we were much later was them trying to protect us
Yeah.
from things that they thought that we didn't need to learn quite yet or didn't need to know at all. It's like, well, I see where you're coming from,
Mm.
but you can't protect me from the world,
Yeah.
and you can't protect me from the pain that you went through. If you try to do that, it's going to reflect in different ways that you're not going to intend for. And
Yeah.
I would rather know these things early on
Mm.
than have it shielded from me till I'm an adult.
It's like it's a disconnect, right?
Yeah.
Like going through my career and everything else in school and all these other different things. Um, always feeling that disconnect but not understanding it.
Mhm.
So as you know, reconciliation and undrift and all these things started, you know, coming into play, it was really like, oh my God, if I would have known how many years ago this would have been different for me.
Yeah.
Right. And then I look at my younger sibling and think, oh my gosh, I wish I could just give you the epiphany that I had into stepping into this space and say, yeah, I am Indigenous.
Mhm.
And I can wear my beaded earrings and I can wear my colorful clothes because this is who I am.
Yeah.
For so long, I really dimmed a lot of that because, again, when you look at, you know, yes, we are in an age where Indigenous peoples are really taking up space, but you can be in situations where it's not the safest.
It's
It's
still,
still not the safest,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's it's never been a better time to showcase
Mhm.
that Indigenous blood, but there is still a lot of pushback,
Yeah.
and there is always going to be that pushback, and you really just need to gauge the spaces that you're in
Mm.
and understand if it's safe or not. Still, unfortunately, that is still something that we have to put in the back of our heads. Like,
And and also like when I'm in a conversation with somebody who maybe has very interesting views or very combative views
mhm,
about Indigenous people on our journey or the validity
validity of
of our
our,
journey,
yeah,
um, this is not a hill I'm willing to die on, right?
yeah,
Like having that healing and that knowledge and wisdom to be like, all right, well, you have a great day and you can take I'm not going to argue with you because I know you're in a space where you can't be talked to.
yeah,
I can't share this knowledge with you and I can't be vulnerable to share this knowledge with you because I know you're not going to accept it.
yeah. We
Right.
only have an innate amount of energy from every single day too,
Yes.
and why not spend that energy building something better than
Yeah.
fighting against the old way of living,
Yeah.
right? So,
Also, I don't wear a cape,
yeah.
although it'd be really cool if I did.
There's a lot of emotions that come with passion. Uh, but diving deeper into where that passion is coming from with your own identity, with your own
Mm,
upbringing,
yeah.
um, how important it is to really understand who you are, where you came from, who came before you even decide to take on a role of the healing work and the social work that we end up doing for these communities. Yeah, just the importance behind really knowing where your cup came from
Mm,
first.
yeah. I think the storytelling comes naturally.
Mhm.
I was very blessed to have a grandfather that was a storyteller, as well as an uncle who, you know, he's long since passed, but again, another person you would be able to sit and listen to for
Mhm.
hours. And it would be a story about how his truck broke down one time or who helped him and who didn't, right? Like it not necessarily like a creation story or going back into time and
The stereotypical.
our beads
Yeah.
and feathers aren't really
Yeah.
present. But again, you're learning these key things out of life skills through storytelling,
Mhm.
right? Um, and growing up, I was raised at Williams Lake it's a very cowboy pioneer
Mhm.
area. And I'm very proud of that heritage. I'm very proud to know that I come from pioneer women, pioneer men. And I say that because it's a lot of grit that comes with that lifestyle, with really, hunting and fishing is your main source of food. Time with your family is important. It's probably one of the most important things because that's where all the hard work gets done. In our territory, we have fish camp and a, a gathering of the Six Nations that come together around that time. And you see along the river just everyone fishing and hunting and you see families like seniors all the way down to little, even in the womb, little people just cleaning fish and doing all these things. And I joke, like, that's why I don't like salmon very much, because when you have to clean thousands of them,
It's
it's,
a
it's
whole
no longer.
community chore. It
But you
takes the
know
whole
what?
family.
There's stories being told,
Absolutely.
right? Whether it's your aunties and they're telling stories about maybe an auntie that had gone missing and returned to community, or maybe it's a story about how your great grandparents met.
Mhm.
And you realize you have this lineage of people who have met their person and they've spent like all this time together and it was a beautiful life, right? In theory. um, but also you apply that to the knowledge that you carry and you pass on to your own family
Mhm.
when you start looking at your own life and the things that you want to accomplish, right? So I think for me, I took that cultural knowledge and I applied it just more in a different way. um, and there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Mhm.
For the longest time, I always think, oh, I'm a really bad Indian. Like, I don't know this or I don't know that. Or, I'm not good with the sewing machine. So ribbon skirts are out the door for me, but I can make a heck of a drum,
Mhm.
right? So,
I think this society that we've lived in is really honed in on pushing of what is wrong with a person
yeah,
or what
this
is not
is,
sufficient enough, rather than
yes,
focusing on their strengths,
yes.
right? There's a big connection, not a connection. There's always been a huge importance on intellect,
Mhm.
right?
Oh, yes.
On the brain in the
Yeah.
world that we live in, but all of the knowledge in the world, and we've seen this with the fact that we have supercomputers in our pockets now. We have all the knowledge that we could ever
Hmm.
need and then some.
Hmm.
But none of that matters if we don't have the wisdom or the heart or the morals to really use those in a productive way. And that's where the connection
Absolutely.
from your brain to your heart comes. And
Hmm.
that's something that I've noticed when connecting to uh, my Indigenous culture and understanding where my more Western worldview interconnects with it,
Hmm.
is the the interpretation of these different stories and these land-based teachings really teach you that wisdom, and it really teaches you to open up your heart and to understand how your body is really feeling when coming across all of these different forms of
Hmm.
information.
And also just interpreting that information through your
Exactly.
own lens, right?
Yeah.
Through that authentic, genuine lens of, oh, this is what I've known. And I think throughout my career, that's something that I've always done quite naturally, um, is paralleling that. Okay, this is something like I know how to work.
Mhm.
That has been instilled both the German side, that's very present. Girl can work. Um, and how to apply that knowledge in different ways
Mhm.
when it comes to community-based programming, when it comes to building relationships with funders or building relationships with your surrounding Indigenous communities, really building out that strength and creating that, hey, we may be in an urban space, but we're still Indigenous,
Mhm.
right? And what we've always been taught is we heal and we grow as a community.
Yeah.
So let's be relatives. Let's be friends. Let's figure this out together,
There's
right?
no need for competition.
No,
Like,
no.
that's the craziest thing that I've seen in these different communities, is there's always people that are fighting for the right for that voice, but that voice is for everyone,
Yeah,
right?
and
And
when you look at the cultural context of, even our land acknowledgments, that's born out of when we had relationships or experience with other communities. That song,
mhm,
that would, you know me, I know you,
yeah,
and we know this because you gave me this song, right? Like all these different things that come into play. And I actually haven't spent a holiday with my family in a long time.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But that's a choice that I think that I was very cognizant and aware of when I moved out this way and then started working in these communities, and just thought, if there is an opportunity in my own, doesn't mean that I can't stop growing. Like I can grow in a different direction. Maybe one day down the road there will be an opportunity, right?
mhm,
And if not, I'm fulfilled knowing that I did something,
yeah.
like I think growing up a millennial, dare I say it, there's that hustle culture of, oh, you have to make this much money, you have to have this many cars, this big a house.
Yeah.
But I think my grandfather was always saying, when it's your time, your time. And at the end of the day, when you're leaving, are you proud of what you've done?
Mhm,
And I can say that I am. I'm very proud of the things that I've accomplished on on a scale that I feel like was important. Um, and looking at the youth that I worked with, looking at the women that I worked with, or even the families that I've worked with, seeing some of those people go off and build beautiful lives.
Mhm.
You know, I'm an advocate of keep it simple, don't complicate things. And when it comes to your life, don't let anyone else dictate what that looks like for you,
I think
right?
that's the native way. Keep things simple.
Keep it
Yeah.
simple. It doesn't have to be so complicated all the time.
No, it really doesn't. Yeah.
Especially when you're healing. Like, love yourself. Love yourself through that. Find your community or your support system that's going to love you through that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we talk about love enough, and that how it looks differently from your friends to your your colleagues to your family to your partner.
Yeah, even
You
to
know,
yourself
oh
too,
yeah,
right?
oh, I
That's
can tell
so
you
important.
that I love myself more today than I did in my beginning years.
Mm,
And that's just because there was in that growing up in that time frame,
mm,
mental health and addiction weren't talked about, right?
mhm.
So today seeing people talk about mental health and addiction and
More
how
so
it's
than
affecting,
ever, right?
like, I'm so happy
Yeah,
because the more we talk about it, the better we do,
absolutely.
right? So people who are stepping into this healing work, your addictions counselors, your peer support people, look after yourself through that,
Hmm.
because it can, like, that vicarious trauma isn't talked about enough. And when you go home after a 15-hour shift, let's talk about that for a minute. Like, when you're in mental health, sometimes you're looking at a 15-16 hour shift depending on your shifting schedule, right?
Sometimes the shifts don't really end, even when you get home too,
No,
right?
they
The
don't.
worrying and the trying to
Hmm.
plan for the next days, and yeah,
Yeah,
it can
like,
be a
we
lot.
don't think about how incredible it is that you have this group of people who put their mental health sometimes on the shelf and care for
Mm.
others. And when you step into this work, it's not easy work.
No,
And the pay, wow, you look
it's
back,
pay.
pay. But I think the biggest thing is, you know, when I was working with families, going home at the end of the day, a long day full of so many other things. Um, but sitting in circle and having a little 4-year-old come around with smudge, and how excited all the kids were about who gets to light the smudge, who gets to hold the smudge, who gets to sit next to the elder and help the elder that day. Like that, to me, after a long day, your feet hurt, your back hurts, your head is pounding. Maybe you didn't eat that day, but you go to bed knowing that, you know what? It's okay to be a little hungry today, because my soul, like, I really, those opportunities, they don't come around very often, and we don't celebrate them
Mhm.
as much as we should. I
Yeah.
think. I think if you're a clinician and you're in space, and maybe you only had one person show up to group that day, but that was the most impactful day that you had, take that home and celebrate it, because that's still good work.
Yeah, and those victories through other people that you were talking about earlier,
Mm.
even if it's one person that shows up, like you have no idea how
How
that
hard,
session could have
yeah,
affected them, right?
yeah, or even how much courage it took for them to get there.
How much they needed that, you know?
How much they wanted to run out after meeting you for the first time,
Yeah.
right? But that's what I can appreciate about the mental health field and how it's evolved over the last decade or 15 years, is really how people want to build a better relationship as
Mhm.
with you as a worker or with you as an individual, just wanting to make sure that you are a safe place
Yeah.
to unburden and just be present. Because sometimes, like, some of the best work I've ever done has been with somebody who maybe never opened up in circle, never opened up in any other fraction, but at the end of it, when you're doing your survey or your truth telling circle about, what can we do better, and they open up and they tell you this beautiful story, and you're sitting there trying not to cry because professional, right? But
Mhm.
also being grateful, thinking, oh, you've been here 25 upwards of 25 weeks and you haven't said too much to anybody, but here you are telling me how coming to this every Saturday or whatever has really shaped who you, like, has really helped you step into different spaces
Mhm.
in terms of reaching out for trauma recovery or different types of therapy or going to your first AA group. That's powerful. And So for the people out there who are maybe starting out in their career, some of the best conversations you're going to have are going to be sometimes in a car when there's no eye contact,
Hmm.
less pressure,
Hmm.
easier to share, but also, and it could come at the end of program where somebody is really feeling moved to really share how that it impacted.
Yeah.
And you don't think about that because you're like, oh,
Yeah, yeah. Your own universe can always filter out uh it's your own perspective of how you're seeing someone go out through program
yeah.
too. Just like you said, some of the quietest people that you think are not resonating with anything that you're talking about.
You're like, they're definitely here for the food.
Yeah, exactly. But then at the end, when you have your sharing circle and they open up and you realize that it's just so overwhelming for them. And it's like it's a completely different story than what you were telling yourself the whole time, right?
Yeah.
So,
And at that moment, after the group leaves, Elder, you got 20 minutes for Mel because I need to unpack this.
yeah.
And say, like, go home, smudge, and pray, and really thank Creator for that validation,
Hmm.
because sometimes this work can be really hard and you don't get that very, sometimes you get yelled at more than you get thanked. But when it does happen, sit in it.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes being in a fast-paced environment, whether it's addiction or mental health, we don't take that time to really sit in it.
It can be really easy to just move on to the next
Oh
thing.
yeah, because there's 100 other things that you have to do
Oh yeah.
because you're stretching a budget.
Yeah.
You're, making sure that your recruitment strategy is
We're
never
constantly being
ending.
taught to hustle through everything, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's a bad habit to try and get rid of, but when you really take the time to take a step back and to remember to actually breathe
Yes.
instead of
Not say
the small little hyperventilating that you've been doing through the day when
yes.
you're stressing out and doing
Right.
stuff, right? It's crazy how much that can affect how good your body feels in that moment. Even if your
Yeah.
head is pounding, even if you are absolutely exhausted, to just really take a step back and appreciate the world around you, the
Mhm.
impact that you've had on that day, all of the good things that have gone on about it can change your body chemistry just in that moment itself.
Yeah. But also, if you're having a really hard day, you get to reflect back and be like, remember that one day, that one
Yeah.
time? And you're like, okay, I still love it. And originally when I went into human services, um, I wasn't sure what it was going to be. Like I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if it was something I was going to stay in. And then I did. Surprise. But I think it was just the diversity of who I was going to come across, the journeys that I was going to be part of.
Hmm.
Hopefully positive, but that's not always the case in terms of just following policy, following procedure, following all those things that sometimes can get in the way of healing in terms of like, I'm going to take everything away from you that has alcohol based, but I'm going to talk you through it because I'm nice and I want this to be less traumatic than it is. Right.
Yeah.
And just being kind. Like, I know for me, the biggest push for me was if myself or a family member or someone I'm really close to is going through this, I would hope that they would come across somebody who loves this work as much as I do,
Hmm.
who can be kind, even when even when everything in you just wants to just walk away or not be so nice.
Yeah.
But really being centered, um, because some of the things that we experience as human is can be heartbreaking,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So make sure you know where you come from. Make sure you know what healing practices you need as a person. Um, Experiencing other people,
Hmm.
right? Like it's when you think about it, it's a strange concept, but I'm really lucky to have done what I've done in my life,
Hmm.
and the moves that I've made and the risks that I've taken, really to step even out of Indigenous work and into corporate or for-profit work and experience that and being able to navigate that um, in that Indigenous way,
Hmm.
right?
Good bow tie on that one.
Yeah.
I love the Indigenous way.
The Indigenous, whatever it
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
you can be interpreted however you want to do that. But
Yeah, so I just touching on your experience
mm,
through mental health awareness
mm,
and addiction counseling, from what you've seen, in Alberta or in Canada as a whole, where do you see that we're maybe falling through the cracks or some
Oh my
weaknesses that we can
goodness.
try to like really hone together and
I'm going aftercare, continuing
yeah,
care. That's key. I mean, somebody goes to treatment for 45, 60 days, maybe
yeah,
90. That's not a lot of time when you think
no,
about it in the span of life that you live.
yeah,
And somebody can come back multiple times. I've had youth 13, 15 times,
yeah,
and what I dislike about sometimes is sometimes there's that thought of, oh, they'll never get it or they'll never be in that space. And you got to have that hope.
well,
You got to
and
have that faith. And
if
the
you're
minute
leading with
you
that
don't,
mindset with a person, like that's so much more damaging too.
because they feel it,
Yeah,
they feel it,
absolutely.
they see it. So aftercare, continuing care is really important. Um, the funding for that is really important. I don't know if anyone in the federal government's listening, or even provincial. When you look at those community-based entities, you don't need to open up new facilities all over the place. You just need to rely on the communities and their wisdom and their knowledge to direct you in the spaces that they know are going to be helpful,
Yeah,
and have that financial support to back it.
yeah.
Um, I think that's the biggest thing when you're looking, especially at specifically Indigenous healing, Indigenous recovery models. Why not lean into it? Why not rely on your community based programs? Because ultimately, we know what we need to do.
Yeah, these programs have been in it. They've
Mhm.
been already doing the work with the the funding, sometimes the little funding that they most of the time the little
I
funding that they
will
have.
say, like, some of the most innovative and creative things I've seen done to expand program in order to meet the need on shoestring budget. You have your community workers who are out there collecting donations. They're working themselves tirelessly to build up enough relationships in order to get free soup, or having somebody on their team make bannock.
Hmm.
Those type of things that if you if you provide, you will see the change in the shift.
Hmm.
Um, but that's with anything. People always say, what could change? Oh, more money, right? But it's investing in the right places at the right time.
It's more intentionality when it comes
Hmm.
to that funding, right?
Yeah, and making sure that it's going to Indigenous-led organizations.
Yeah.
Like, I can't stress that enough. Like, I really can't. When you look, I sometimes feel for our brothers and sisters that are working in like non-Indigenous organizations that have like an Indigenous strategy or stream, um, because sometimes they don't have the bandwidth to really make the impact they know they can make through their cultural traditional ways due to just policy and procedures, right?
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of times there'll be a restriction, like, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. I'm like, well, you can't, but I can. I can do whatever I want. No, I can't. But like, I can find a way, or we can find a way together.
Yeah.
And that's why relationships are really important. And also being humble in those relationships is really important. And if you're really here to learn and to help Indigenous people grow, then give us the room and the space to do so. Even with reconciliation, like I've said before, is Indigenous people, we also need the space and time to reconcile our experiences within ourselves, our families, and our communities. We're expected to show up and have a pathway laid out. But even most recently, I had this experience where, we deviated from what was done in the past into something more private for the organization, for residential school survivors to come together and have that space. And so why is it important? Well, how many opportunities do we have to do this? And why do we have to perform on this day?
Yeah.
Because isn't it, I correct me if I'm wrong, but this is for us, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Why does this
Please.
feel like a show that we're
Yeah,
putting on?
exactly.
Yeah.
And that sometimes I have to check myself, because you want to do good things, so you have to have the right partnership at the right time.
Yeah.
But the same token, I also want to give that space, authentic space, to Indigenous people to be Indigenous, to be vulnerable on a day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
It can be such a and even just the idea of truth and reconciliation, it's generally new to Canada and as a whole. There's going to be it's been proven to be a pretty loaded topic
Mm.
depending on who you talk to. Um,
Yes.
and it's a fine line to walk right
Mm.
now as an Indigenous person trying to hold those days, to hold
Mm.
that whole idea, that concept in general in a healthy standpoint, while understanding that you still have to hold that relation with, the certain organizations and stuff that uh you may be butting heads with and stuff,
Yeah.
or might not have that the exact mindset of what truth and reconciliation actually is. So where do
Yeah.
you come from with, teaching
Mm.
and holding that space, and then holding the space for Indigenous people that are needing this day to actually heal,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And, when it really rolls down, who really benefits,
Yeah.
right? Um, I'd rather have an elder come into our space and share stories and have others share their stories, their knowledge, and their wisdom, and for us to share food and time together, because that's the one thing that is across most Indigenous communities is time is so valuable.
Hmm.
Our time together, our time with our families, our time learning. And we very rarely acknowledge that.
Hmm. Before we end off this episode here, I'd really like to pick your brain about your own perspective of how you view, just the term as a whole, the truth and reconciliation when it comes to our people, where we are in this current state of the world, and how you view that general idea
Mm.
moving forward and benefiting our people.
I'm grateful for it. Those are very important documents. Like, it's a very important statement to have out there and have that tangible evidence.
Hmm.
As a we function in a Western world, having that the UNDRIP and the Truth and Reconciliation Initiative. Um, Personally, it's important because it validates a lot of the work that I've done for the last, like, I don't know how many years. Um, but also, I truly feel like as an Indigenous people, it's permission to take up space in a good way, take up that space and really lean into our song, our dance, our storytelling, um, and sharing that wisdom and experience to showcase that they weren't bad things. A smudge wasn't a bad thing.
Mhm.
Sweat was an amazing thing. Tea dances, moon ceremonies, all these types of things that really, like, when you go through ceremony, when you go through those experiences, it's very, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but you feel different,
Yeah.
right? You feel connected.
There's a flow state that gets unlocked.
Yeah.
And usually you find this flow state through forcing your body into doing things like physical activity, or,
Yeah.
getting lost in playing music and stuff
Mhm.
like that. But this is coming from ceremony. This
Mhm.
is coming from reconnecting to the land, right?
Mhm.
So there's something there.
And I feel like the opportunity is now to really, like, whether or not, reconciliation and truth is coming at a genuine pace. You know what I mean? In terms of, are people, is the general Canadian public accepting it as truth and reconciliation, or is it something that they're like, okay, yes, okay, let's
Hmm.
do it, let's partake. Um, so for me, in the work that I do, and when I think about my family, it's very important because that's how they were able to keep certain things out of our territory, such as mines and receiving their land title and things like that. Like, that's powerful stuff. That's tenacity.
Hmm.
That's pioneer way, right? Like, that's how that grit is shown. So when I think of truth and reconciliation as me, and when I'm talking to folks that maybe have a very skewed view or don't believe, um, I have that opportunity to just share what I can, gauge that. But really, I know, however closed off they are, there is something that will connect and bring
Hmm.
them back to their own story, maybe, or not, each to their own. But for me, I've always been someone who likes to get my foot into one door and then slowly kick it open. So
Gently burst through it.
yes.
Yeah.
Ooh. So I think that for me, it's just really about, okay, if this is what I want to see for my people, if this is what I want to see for the young ones who come after me, like the little ones who grew up and, maybe they see Auntie Sugar or Auntie Mel, I think, oh, she's pretty cool, hopefully, that they also find the courage to step in and take up space and be Indigenous, right? Like to not be scared, to not have a fear of being who they are and to showcase their cultural identity, to wear it, to be proud of it, to be able to talk about our previous generations in a good way.
Yeah.
And be grateful for what they've learned. I think that's, for me, I again, it comes back to my family, right? Really hoping they recognize that leaving community was very difficult. Being far away from my home fire has been really hard. But I know that the impact that I've made in these separate spaces has been just unexplainable. And I don't regret any of the decisions or choices that I've made to bring me to this point. And really, when I remember when truth and reconciliation began to happen, I was like, oh, great. Now we can really showcase our strength and our resilience and really teach the next generations to stand up and be proud. So yeah, I think that's what it means to me, despite, everything else that can come, the political speech that can come with it. But as an individual, just grateful that we are in a time where being Indigenous is pretty cool.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
the craziest
dangerous
feeling?
but cool.
Yeah. It'll just keep getting cooler and less dangerous, hopefully, as things move forward. But I think that's a perfect way to put it. And it just put a bow on this whole conversation. I just want to say thank you again for coming out and being part of what we're trying to do with this podcast, and for being so open with your knowledge and your experiences. I am extremely grateful to know you as a person and to even know you even deeper now with what you've shared on this podcast. So thank you very much.
So Chanel, yeah, thank you for having me and listening to me ramble. It's been great.
Thank you guys for tuning into this episode. We hope that this conversation has impacted you in unique ways. And if anything has, please reach out in the comments and let us know. We'd love to hear your experiences. And honestly, that'll help us direct our podcast to where we feel like we need to go with it. Be well. Hi.